Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me here again on sj's classes. This is my third lecture on 20th century English literary criticism. My previous two video lessons were on T.S. Eliot and I.A. Richards. In this video lesson, I will discuss an important movement of 20th century literary criticism, which is the New Criticism. Let's move into the details regarding this movement. New Criticism is that movement which effected a total transformation to the practice of literary criticism. The new emphasis that was given to criticism earned the adjective new in the movement's title. This movement gained impetus in both England and America during the first half of the 20th century. Among all the critics of this time period, T.S. Eliot wielded a great deal of influence on the establishment and growth of this movement. His work, The Sacred Wood, came out in 1920, and this kick-started a new trend in literary criticism. The term New Criticism was put into circulation by J.E. Spingarn, Joel Elias Spingarn, who is an American literary critic. He explained the theories of some of the Italian critic Benedetto Croce in a booklet called The New Criticism that came out in 1911. Later in 1941, the American critic John Crowe Ransom, the founder of Kenyon Review, wrote a book reviewing the criticism of I.A. Richards, T.S. Eliot, and Ivo Winters. Ivo Winters is an American poet and literary critic. And John Crowe Ransom gave this title, The New Criticism, to his book, and it came out in 1941. This title popularized the movement and has come to stay. In this book, there is an essay titled Wanted, an Ontological Critic, where Ransom pleads for an establishment of an intellectual movement that deserves to be named New Criticism. Ransom strongly believed that teaching literature meant concentrating on criticism. That's a good idea there being shared by Ransom. The teaching of literature, the learning of literature meant concentrating on criticism rather than concentrating on poetry, drama, novel, fiction. Now, Ransom strongly believed that teaching literature, learning literature meant concentrating on criticism. This also meant defining and enjoying the aesthetic characteristics of literature. This movement largely arose as a reaction to the prevailing modes of criticism, which were largely subjective and merely an aesthetic impressionism. It also stood in contrast to the biographical and historical criticism that was followed earlier. Earlier, critics used to focus either on the biography of the writer or the historical context under which the work was written. The New Criticism demolished all these patterns in literary criticism. The life and times of the author may be of interest to the historian, but not necessarily to the critic. The text ought not to be understood with its origins, which can be understood as the intentional fallacy. I'll talk about it a bit later on. As of now, understand that the text must not be understood with its origins, and that has come down to be known as the intentional fallacy, nor with emotions it arouses, which can be understood as, or which has come to be understood as, the effective fallacy. The new critics believed that text itself provides all evidences which can be examined through its formal elements such as the image, metaphor, plot, character, rhyme, and meter. The new critics also argued that the literary language is different from the scientific or everyday language. The latter, which is scientific or everyday language, is primarily used for one-to-one correspondence, and the scientific language, to be precise, calls our attention to the world outside. Now let's look at literary language. Literary language, on the other hand, organizes the linguistic resources into a special kind of arrangement so as to create an aesthetic experience. This language is inseparable from its content and its meaning. The work has an ideal organic unity in which all elements contribute to create an indivisible whole. This unity is that by which the new critics value a literary work. A detailed examination of these elements which contribute to the unity of the work is what new critics call as close reading. So you might have come across this before, the close reading method, whereby you try to understand the formal elements such as the image, metaphor, plot, character, rhyme and meter, and thereby understand this overall unity which is there in this work. As the new criticism primarily focuses entirely on the context and the language of the text, it can also be called as intrinsic criticism. Eliot's essays in The Sacred Wood show clearly that he was in favor of technical criticism rather than moralistic or impressionistic criticism. The essays The Perfect Critics and The Imperfect Critic give us ample examples to prove his stand. According to Eliot, that criticism which is a revelation of personal emotions is bad criticism. On the other hand, good criticism comes out of a refined sensibility. Eliot says that to be a good critic, one has to be a being of the higher order. For such a person, technical and aesthetic analysis are necessary, but not necessary enough for criticism. Some of the important proponents of this school of criticism are, I have named a few earlier, like T.S. Eliot, John Crowe Ransom. Some of the other proponents of this school are Alan Tate, R.P. Blackmer, Kenneth Burke, Ivo Winters, Clent Brooks, Robert Penn Warren, William Wimsatt, Richard Emerson, Elsie Knights, Lewis, and Derek Traversy. Two full accounts of New Critical Manifesto appeared as The Intentional Fallacy. The intentional fallacy is actually the problem inherent in trying to judge a work of art by assuming the intent or the purpose of the artist who created it. Trying to understand a work of art by the intention of the author. That is what intentional fallacy is all about. And the next is the effective fallacy. It is the misconception that arises from judging a poem or a work of art by the emotional effect that it produces in the reader. So you identify the effect that a particular work creates on a reader and thereby try to judge or value the work of art. And that is what Wimsatt and Beardsley call as the effective fallacy. So these ideas were put forth by Wimsatt, who is an American linguist, and Beardsley, who is an American philosopher. The twin essays, which is the intentional fallacy and the effective fallacy, constitute and encourage critics to focus on the work itself rather than its origins or personal experiences of the work. The new critics have often been labeled as formalist to show their lack of social concerns, and also their works were termed unhistorical as it isolates a work from its origins and context. The myth critics also attacked the new movement. Later, the Geneva School, the structuralists, and the Russian formalists also attacked new criticism. Gradually, this movement, which was once new, came to be undermined and went out of vogue as it underemphasized the reader and the poet by overemphasizing the object, which is the poem or the work of art. So that is all about the new criticism. I gave you a very short introduction to this movement. I explained some of the works which actually helped the growth of this movement. I also talked about some of the important proponents of this movement, and finally I spoke about how this movement declined, how it went out of vogue. I hope you have a clear understanding regarding this movement. If you have any doubts, please use the comment space to share your doubts so that I can clarify them. Thank you so much for watching.